We're in Proverbs. Yes, it's a summer of wisdom studies. And I'm glad you've joined us again. This one's for July 26th. We're at the very end of Proverbs 15 and going into the 16th chapter quite a bit. And really these texts teach us in a fashion some summaries of really what it's about to be a follower of God. So many people think that being a Christian means you're operating out of some kind of fear or shame or doubt. That's not what motivates us at all. If you ever feel like you're living your Christian life because you're afraid of how God's going to punish you, or you just want to avoid God's punishment, you got the wrong image in your head of how God works with us. It's more of a relationship of our desire to please God flows out of the natural, regenerate, repentant heart of a believer that recognizes that we've been redeemed, we've been changed, we got a whole new direction for our lives, and that we truly are alive because of God. It's like a child that looks at a parent and wants to please them. And that's just a tiny way of trying to understand it. C.S. Lewis, in speaking of it, speaks of, perhaps like a pet owner might have a pet that tries to please them, and even that's just this tiny kind of an understanding of our devotion, our desire to please God. We're not robots commanded. We're doing it because it's our new nature is to do what's right and to adore and worship God. And if you think about those moments when it just felt so right to be a follower of Jesus, that came because you had been motivated to do something out of obedience and a desire to be a pleasure to God. So really, if you think about it, one of the most important words in our language when used properly is the word yes. In fact, if you know even anything in another language, you might know how to say the word yes in another language. So, in fact, I'm just trying to think off the top of my head. I could probably say yes in about 6, 7, maybe 8 different languages. I can also ask for food. That's probably about enough to know right there. But that word yes can be used in such a powerful way, right? It gives affirmation. It gives a commitment. It gives a conviction. It gives an alignment. It gives a definition. It helps understand what the facts are, what your friendships are. That word yes can get you into trouble sometimes, and it can get you out of trouble other times. But at its most appropriate as a follower of Christ, it's a confession and a consent to the truth of God spoken into our lives. Think of it like when a young man gets on a knee and he proposes to his bride-to-be. When she says yes, he leaps to his feet with joy. Now we're starting to get what it's like to be in this relationship with God. It's the yes that an employee says when the offer comes for a dream job that they want, and they say, yes, I'll take it. It's those kind of ideas that happen. Most important for us as a follower of Jesus Christ, yes is a way that we acknowledge that He has something better for our lives. So we say yes to God. And by saying yes to God, we've said no effectively to everything else. And that's an important way to remember that. One of the verses we're looking at says in Proverbs 16:9 says, a person's heart plans his way, but the Lord determines his steps. That's important for us to remember. We can think where we want to go. We can make plans, and that's okay. Over in James, the writer says, instead of saying, tomorrow you're going to go and do such and such a thing, you should say, if the Lord wills, we will go to such and such a place and do such and such a thing. This idea of saying yes to God is realizing that we still can make plans, we still think, we still have a brain, we still have desires, but they are yielded to His desire for our lives. A yes brought me to Lubbock 4 years ago to serve this congregation. It's been an absolute joy. And a yes is now said I'm following God's guidance to pastor a church in Woodville, Texas, where I'm headed in just a couple of weeks. So there's this great joy in the moment of our lives by saying, yes, Lord, I will do as you will. If you think about it, the times of trial and struggle in your life may have been when you've said maybe to God, or at worst, no. So think about that we have for us. The text today starts off in the 15th chapter, the 33rd verse. It says, "The fear of the Lord is the instruction of wisdom, and before honor comes humility." That when we humble ourselves before God, we're lifted up. And that idea flows through God's teachings all the way to Christ, to the Sermon on the Mount. The opposite, the text tells us, is that pride comes before a fall. So why not start with humility and be lifted up? Why not start at the back of the room as Jesus taught his disciples, and then have the host say, "No, come to the head table." That's the way to have a sense of direction in your life with God. When you say yes to Him, you're putting yourself last, and you let God decide where He wants to determine your steps to go. And when He determines your steps, man, they're going to go to the right place all the time. You know, as a youth minister years ago, I had a really incredible experience at a camp one year. We were up in Glorietta, and there was an overnight hiking trip that we were going to take the youth on. And one of my youth at that time was a young lady who was vision impaired. She was going through a health condition. She was losing her sight, and she wanted to go on the hiking trip. And I asked the guides, "Is that okay?" And they said, "Yes, if one of you commits to hold her hand and tell her where to put her steps every time." My wife, Kelly, and I said, "We'll do that." So we took turns holding her hand and telling her where to put her foot for hours at a time. I look back on it, you'd think it was laborious, but it was kind of joyful. We just say, "Here, put your foot here, here's a log, step over this, there's a rock, be careful." And we walked for hours that way, and it went great for her. Up, we camped, we came back down the mountain. The next night she gave her testimony, and she said, "I could hear all around me the athletic boys, going under their own strength, slipping and falling." And someone asked me if I was afraid if I would fall. And she said, as she gave her testimony, she said, "No, I wasn't afraid, because I knew I trusted Jay or Kelly to tell me where to put my foot. And I never fell." And she went on to say, it's the same way with following Jesus. When we put our hand in His and we trust Him to direct our paths, and we say yes to Him when He says, "Put our foot here, put our foot there, or don't step there, don't step here," we don't fall, we don't slip, and we're at peace. Man, that is what this is about. When we want to please God, we can have wisdom by saying, what I want to do, I want to bring glory to God. We can realize we're accountable to God. We can realize we have a right relationship with Him, and we want to stay in that right relationship. And we can demonstrate the blessing of serving God to others when we're doing that in our own lives. And then we get that chance to stand before others when they ask us, "Man, were you afraid to follow Him? Were you afraid you might slip, you might fall?" We can say, just like that young girl did that spoke to hundreds of youth. And we say, no, we're not afraid, because we know who has our hand and whom we've said yes to, and who will determine our steps. The next day after she shared her testimony, hundreds of teenagers took turns blindfolding each other and leading each other up and down little trails, telling them where to put their feet. They said it was practice for them, for what it would be like to follow Jesus when they got back home. How about you? Are you realizing your own limited vision when you look at Proverbs? and ready to yield to the total vision of God for your life? Say yes to Him. God bless you. Have a great day.